Well, in 1981, we were looking for a house, and you this we had a budget, and this house with all this space and all this character was available for less than a two-bedroom in Oakley.
Wow.
And our real estate agent, who is a former student of Dick's, really didn't want to sell us this house.
Right.
You don't want to live in Madisonville, but we already had some um, objectives in mind for how we wanted to bring up a family. And that was mixed racially and economically developed neighborhood. And we just walked up on the porch and fell in love with this place and pretty much said, we're getting this. And we had 3 years in our 30s where we just worked nights after school, weekends. A lot of the projects got done. His parents helped a lot. And we found that there are things that we had in common. Basically gardens, because everybody loves, has some level of something going on, even if it's tomatoes and pots. But people had been from gardening backgrounds. They loved that we were cleaning the yard and restoring the outside because it was really junky. People would just stop and talk to us. And I think we didn't meet neighbors except as they were walking and we were working. I joined the library immediately. We joined St. Anthony's Parish right off the bat. And there we started meeting some people that, we could talk to, and we had things in common with that we knew, so-and-so, and my grandma's over next to you. And I'll tell you, I think the library is the best asset in the neighborhood. I used to see more people there that I knew than I did even in church or when they still had the IGA where the Porsche place is on Plainville. It's just been the most welcoming institution. And unlike churches, which have people in silos of their belief and often their race, everybody comes to the library. Everybody. And Terry's just one of a long line that have just brought people together, done programming, been good to kids, firm with noisemakers. I mean, it's just been the best place ever.
Yeah, I would say that for our kids, when they were growing up, the best place was Menino's Grocery. Well, I taught one of the several Menino brothers, John, and his sister was at Marion High School when I was teaching at Purcell before it became Purcell Marion. But Mr. Menino, for every kid that he knew who was baptized in the neighborhood, he gave him a silver dollar. And so, I think he gave out a couple of $100 silver over the years.
Wow.
And he was a godfather to some 33 kids,
yes.
Not family.
Oh, my God, yes.
Because people knew him.
Yeah. And he extended credit to people in the neighborhood. So it was a full service grocery store. He had a butcher. He had a produce department. It was full service. Wow. And so the kids loved to go there, just buy candy and just hang out. Store. Hey, I'm going to walk over to the store.
Right.
And then when I started to get interested in urban gardening, we got the lot next to Menino's, and I built that.
Okay.
And with some of the people who worked for Mr. Menino and some neighbors and friends, that was a good connection for the neighborhood, black and white. Mm-hmm. But Mr. Menino was so generous that when we said, we really don't have water on the property, he poked a hole in the side of his store and provided us with water for a few years until we had enough money to get water on the property. I stopped being manager of that to what did I do next?
You developed the community garden at Purcell Marion.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, I handed that over probably around 1989 or 1990 to another local gardener.
Okay.
And yeah, then I built Purcell's garden on DeSales Lane right behind the high school. And then after that, I built Erie Garden.
You've heard us say we love the library, and we've connected to people through gardening in various locations. We raised our kids here, and they went to Cincinnati Public for grade school and Purcell Marion for high school, where Dick was teaching.
So anyway, those were the roughest years, and you know, you're tempted to flee, but you said no, you know, we live here too, and you know, we're not doing the neighborhood any favors if we bail. I mean, you know, you gotta just live where you live. So you know, over the years, certainly we've made lots of friends, and I was going to mention Byron Costin because at one point he was the librarian at Madisonville. After he retired from downtown, where he was head of the film department at Main Branch, he came out here. He grew up in Madisonville. His family grew up in Madisonville. His mother was one of the first black parishioners at St. Anthony's, and that's an interesting story in itself. You know, it was a story of the 50s and the early 60s. So, yeah, over the years we've made lots of friends. Some have moved out of the neighborhood after they retired, but they're still friends. One of the guys that has a bed over in our garden over there is a former neighbor, Rick Lysak. He used to live just down the street. He and his wife Peg. And Byron and Jody Costin, Byron's wife, was the caretaker for our kids, the daycare.
But she was a social worker. The only reason she was doing daycare was because she had little kids at that point.
She did. And by the way, one of her kids was Joan Costin, who is now Jane Costin, who is now a very well-known journalist. Who does she work for?
She works for Vox. In Washington, D.C.
Yes. Yeah, you hear her commentaries every once in a while.
She also has been published in the New York Times.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talent, I think, in Madisonville that, you know,
people don't realize it.
You just don't know it. Yeah. Well, Dr. Metz was certainly an interesting character. A former student of mine, Ken Tankersley, is an archaeologist, and he's the guy who wrote the book about the most recent book about Dr. Metz in Madisonville, loaded with all sorts of wonderful information.
Yeah.
That was part of the attraction for me as I got to learn about Madisonville's history after we moved in, was how rich in history it is, not only human history, but archaeological human history.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, man, the place is just, you know, Dr. Metz was, you know, one of the most famous archaeologists at the time in the 1890s. So when we were visiting some friends in Boston, we went over to the Peabody and found the case where they had been on display, but it said something like, this display is no longer available. And I think what happened is that Native Americans have begun to sort of reclaim their relics and their artifacts and their history. And so I think that's part of the issue there. There's so much, thousands and thousands of things were taken out of the Madisonville site. You know, just there is an official Madisonville site memorial with an overlook out over the flats down by the river where the settlement was, and there were many artifacts taken out of this spot that's right there in Mariemont. It's got a parking lot. You can walk through it. Yeah. That's how to find it. Get on the historical markers in Ohio thing. Yeah. Well, this is back at the edge
It's the
of it.
last street that's overlooking, like where their little circular walk and their kind of gazebo is.
Yeah. It's at the end of that street.
The end of that street turns down, and at dead ends in a parking lot, and that's where the markers are that tell you about the site, and that's where Dr. Metz excavated.
And some places out in Newtown as well. It's a big site. I mean, that's why it was so important. It was large and had so many artifacts.
Well, I would hope that the neighborhood would keep its diversity, first of all. Racially and economically, that's what makes the neighborhood rich. I would also, as an artist, I would really appreciate if development was more aesthetic. So I guess what I'm hoping, like with Pat's Restaurant, with other places that still exist, I think how the Mets House is set back, how the French Rendezvous is set back. The other buildings on Madison Road have some graciousness, and these buildings aren't gracious. So what can we do to, it's like now it's double time to overcome what has been chosen to make some beauty here. And I think that beauty, and you see it in a little turn of a molding. If you walk this neighborhood, and I walk the dog every day, I see the remnants of beauty from another time.
Right.
And I'm not trying to just be retro or something. You can build beauty today,
Yeah.
but beauty does cost. And it takes a will to say beauty is as important as function.
Right.
So in addition to the actual character of the people here, I'd also, how we keep meeting people is walking places that are sustainable, that you can walk to. And so that was a place, the library is a place, and I don't always walk to the library. Sometimes I have too many books to walk there, but I see people there, and I see people on the sidewalk. And of course, we're mostly talking pre-COVID, but in the idea that the world will get back, we need places where we meet each other, where we run into each other.
Right.
And so that's kind of our hope, that it's still a place for young families to say, wow, this is what I want. This is how I want to raise our kids.
Yep.
And that they feel safe. I mean, when we say the kids love Meninos at a certain age, junior high-ish, they were allowed to walk there. And after a while, it wasn't safe.
Right.
Well, they didn't have any interest. But, a place where kids can walk, where, it's okay to
huge,
let
yeah.
them bike around the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and you don't, your only worry is that they're paying attention to time, not who else is watching them.
Yeah.
The railroad trestles are painted black with Madisonville in them. I love James Billiter's mural. I think the Artsville building is attractive. The jazz thing was great when they had the lots to do the jazz festival. I think encouraging vendors to use planters, there's beauty in what are recognized visual arts, and then there's beauty in other arts like floral arts. I think making the place look welcoming. I'm not sure about statues or anything else right now. I think the gateway thing is nice. You are not in East Hyde Park, you're in Madisonville. You've left Oakley, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And with that may come some pride, because I think we used to call it Madisonville disease, people who had a chip on their shoulder about being left here. It was mostly older people who did not get out in the white flight after the riots in the 60s. And nothing good was ever going to happen here. And then it seemed like that turned around a little bit, because in part, people died or moved off, and younger people who had some enthusiasm and weren't burned up yet took over with hope and energy. They got involved. So that needs to come back, and then some of the art and manifestations of that pride will bubble up.
I would just add that though there are lots of young people moving into the neighborhood, there are not a lot of young black people, professional black people, and that kind of drain, I think, has taken something away from the history of Madisonville, which has long been, you know, an integrated place, although there's always been the same kinds of tensions that you find in American culture at large. I would love to see younger black folks moving in and you know, being a part of the neighborhood again. The kids that I taught at Purcell and Purcell Marion who lived in Madisonville, most the black kids, most of them have moved elsewhere. So that to me is a little bit of a gap, and we need to do whatever it is to get folks back. And I think part of it is to have some street life, you know, in the business district again. Despite all the building there, you know, there's no street life. So we need to get retail back, businesses back, downtown Madisonville.
And, you know, we've been on a year of pause.
Yeah.
So will Bad Tom's survive the COVID thing? Will, you know, B and Pat be able to attract people? And, you know, there's supposed to be a terrace outside of a lay bar that will allow for them to ease into, you know, inside, outside, whatever the requirements end up being. And but that's just it, sitting down where people sit down, have a beer together, they have a glass of wine, they meet their friends, and I think that will help.
The idea is people out on the streets walking to restaurants and bars and shops.
I'll just add something. My parents grew up in Madeira and Indian Hill, not mansions.
Not of money.
Not of money.
No.
But those places were zoned against commerce, so it was totally residential in the 30s and 40s when they were growing up. So everything they did, there was no Kenwood Mall, there was no commerce in Kenwood. Those were still farms. Was in Madisonville. The shoe store was here. Grader's was here. Menino's was here. Drugstore was here. Movie theater. So everything from dates to shopping, clothes stores, 2 different clothes, all of it was down here. My parents would have been 96 and 91. But there's still memory of there being family businesses here. So not only was Menino's here when we moved in, but Bess's Bakery was there, and we would go for donuts. And that was on the corner of Madison and
right here.
Mathis.
Yeah.
And all that was obviously local. And the people who have the cheesecakery she's a granddaughter of Menino. You know, and there are memories here, and I think that's why I think there would be support for, you know, if it isn't outrageously expensive, you know, people aren't going to buy $400 shoes in this neighborhood. But if there was, if it was both useful and reasonable, I think people would want to support what's local.
Speaking of shoes, another legendary character lived in this big house on the corner, Sylvan Grisco. Did you? We used to call him the mayor of Madisonville. He had for anything that he saw, he had advice for it. You know, and he ran for mayor of Cincinnati when he was like 83 years old. He's just
but he had Grisco shoes.
He had but his original shoe shop was right at the foot of the right on Madison Road, almost underneath the trestle, in the lot right next to it. That's now part of the car dealership.